Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my second build of the 10 Div Challenge. And this build, I have to say without a shadow of doubt, is horrible. What did I do? Well, I told myself it was a good idea to do cast on crit flicker discharge, and you probably already know that's a bad idea if you just think about it for 2 seconds, but the idea is the trigger socket of the spell when you use a skill. This is overwritten if you have the Endless Misery jewel, making it so you can actually trigger discharge 4 times a second every 250 milliseconds, and that can be affected with CDR, I believe, but I didn't get any CDR. Needless to say, my plan was, and this is a terrible plan, I was going to do cast on crit with Flicker Strike and Blade Vortex and Ball Lightning with Power Charge on crit. So I would generate a lot of power charges. I also have Flicker Strike generates frenzies, along with 10% chance to gain a frenzy when you hit a marked enemy. And the idea was we'd be hitting a bunch with Blade Vortex and Ball Lightning, and that way I would sustain the charges to proc my Discharge. Unfortunately, I don't generate near enough charges, and Flicker Strike is quite possibly one of the worst skills to use on Ubers. Basically, I can have a really tanky character, but Ubers have a lot of stuff called ground degen, and they tend to stand on it. And in order to do damage with Flicker Strike, you need to be on top of the boss. It literally flickers you on top of the boss, which means you're in that degen, or for example, if you're doing Uber Shaper and you flicker onto him, you're actually inside his laser. Even though he's shooting one direction, you can't attack from behind. Flicker will put you in front of the laser, hit him, and it will put you on a bunch of different sides, and you'll take damage from the laser. And there's a lot of scenarios where basically Flicker is pretty much unusable, like the Uber Maven, the brain phase, where it has 2 lasers, and those lasers will deactivate your regen for 10 seconds. They'll put a debuff on you. You will flicker into that laser and you will instantly die, and you cannot get past that ad phase with Flicker. The only way you beat those fights is simply having so much DPS you kill the boss in literally like 1 or 2 hits, so you end up just overpowering the fights through damage. Otherwise, Flicker is pretty much unusable for Ubers. That being said, we did technically kill 2 Ubers. We actually did Uber Shaper and Uber Eater, of all things. I thought I would get Cortex or Uber Elder, maybe, because those are some of the easier ones. I did not get those because ground degens took me out. But for Uber Eater, fun thing that I learned in the Uber Eater fight, Flicker Strike actually makes it so you can't be hit by the Uber Eater's laser beam thing. I guess from what I can tell is the Uber Eater's laser damage renders like at a certain set distance away from the Uber Eater. So if you Flicker Strike when he goes to do that attack, he actually can't hit you. So one of his most dangerous attacks, Flicker Strike actually was good for. It wasn't good for the fact, he had those balls that like suck you or drown you or whatever. Those would be on top of him most of the time, and you could pretty much never do damage until he was randomly farther away from those things and stuff like that. It was still a huge pain to do that fight, but it was doable because one of its most deadly attacks I could basically always dodge by flickering onto Eater, and then that wouldn't hit me, weirdly enough. But anyways, I'm going to show you guys a map showcase. I didn't start with the map showcase because it's absolutely awful. I'm going to finish with the map showcase. And outside of the other stuff, I decided to use as my vehicle of scaling for the build, I decided to do tri-stacks because that would be a way to get enough crit to have a decent cast on crit, and it would generically scale my discharge while doing the other stuff. This is a good base skeleton for pretty much anything, in my opinion. Any crit build, Tri-Stack's a good base skeleton. It was funny when we did Uber Maven, we did 3 automatic deaths to the ad phase where the brain was shooting the lasers around, and we said, you know what if we just took out our Flicker Strike and we just use Ball Lightning for the fight. And I was actually able to do the Uber Maven with just some random Ball Lightning setup, even though I have this garbage weapon as far as Ball Lightning in my main hand is concerned. I could still do the fight because the character's tanky. It's got 6k life, it's got 2500 ES, I got over 2000 regen of each respective spot if I collectively do the flasks. What is it, 1818? Oh, that's right, I swapped the... What did I swap? I swapped something that messed with my regen, but I'll figure it out later. Basically, I have a lot of regen on the character, I have spell suppress cap, I have over 30,000 evasion with Ghost Dance. This is a character with some good defensive layers, and outside of that, it has good decent scaling layers, it has good percent crit chance, it has good percent damage scaling. Like, the skeleton of Tri-Stack works, and it was something safe I knew I could attach, and it would work with this stupid idea of cast and crit flicker. Unfortunately, the stupid idea of cast on crit flicker weighed the build down way too much to make it anything that I could ever recommend. And let's go ahead and get into showcasing why this is so terrible. If it isn't conceptually obvious enough. So issues are, we have to do multi-strike with Flicker Strike, otherwise there can be scenarios where I could flicker onto an enemy, I could spend my discharge, and then be out of a power charge. And right now, in order to sustain my Flicker Strike, I'm using this node here, the power charge node. I also have Mind Over Matter over here, so that's how we can do Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter. And the idea is essentially flicker around, proc the discharge via the trigger weapon that can trigger up to 4 times a second. I don't have it triggering 4 times a second because I only attack at... where's my Flicker Strike? My Flicker Strike is quite slow. I only attack 5 times a second, and that would only be about 1.5 procs per second, because when you're using multi-strike, as far as the trigger mod is concerned, it's as if I'm only triggering it once every 3 attacks. I'm going to cut out this sail, but I made a sail, I guess, for Sublime Vision. Without further ado, let's get into the mapping of what the character looks like when we're actually trying to do mapping content. It is... It's a slow Flicker Strike and a bad Flicker Strike on top of that. Don't make too much fun of me. I wanted to try... I don't know why I keep going back and wanting to try this, because it never pans out well for me to want to try Flicker Strike with the cast on crit, but eventually, maybe 5 years down the line, I'll figure it out, and maybe it'll make Flicker Strike enjoyable for me, but I'm still working on that one. I'll get there at some point, and that's definitely not any level of Kobe Mall. I'll definitely get there at some point. I'll figure out how to make it work and not feel bad. But basically, we flicker around, the discharge goes off. It's not particularly... I thought the discharge would do more damage, to be honest. I thought we'd have better uptime on, like, our power and frenzies, but it's only kind of mediocre. You can see we go to 5 power a decent amount just from our cast on crits, from our ball lightning and our blade vortex, but even then, still not a very potent attack from what I can tell. Just due to the Endless Misery making it deal 60% less damage, 60% less AoE, and then on top of all of that, discharging with only 5 powers, or 5 powers and a couple frenzies, isn't really that dangerous of a discharge, especially if you're only discharging 1.5 times a second, right? It's not like we're getting a large amount of triggers because of the multi-strike setup I have that requires me to attack 3 times each time. But if I don't do the multi-strike, if I do just like faster attacks or something, I don't have enough charges to sustain the Flicker Strike. I'll run out of charges and I'll be locked down for like the couple seconds it takes for Flicker Strike to come off cooldown. I'll have that issue. The multi-strike felt like it was necessary to maintain consistent flickers. Maybe there'd be a scenario where I could do non-multi-strike, but I have a hard time seeing it and seeing it pan out or work in any like functional manner, so to speak. Like right there, you could see we lost the power charges, but since we have Blade Vortex, it lasts a duration. So there's a duration at which it can still hit the boss, generate a power charge, and then I can continue to flicker. But if there's a scenario where I lose Blade Vortex, I do a multi-strike of flicker, and I don't generate a power charge, or I don't proc any cast on crit skills, which for the most part that shouldn't have. We're pretty much accuracy capped. We pretty much have really good crit chance. This shouldn't happen too often, but when it does, I'll be locked down for a couple seconds while I wait for my charges to come back online. Needless to say, I wanted to try this out. It was cooked. It was cooked as hell. I probably should have done this, but I had a fun time doing it still. And next build I do, I'm probably gonna go with something that I think would be a little bit more likely to be a W, because I don't want to do too many fails. I want to do at least a few builds that seem good enough and can encourage someone to say, oh, I can make that build. I could probably do Ubers on 10 Divines, sort of thing. So we'll see if we can do better for day number 3, better than we did on this day number 2 build, which for 10 Divines, I mean, it technically is working, but I don't know how much you could call this technically working, because it is... It's the jerky gameplay of Flicker Strike without... Okay, so you saw that. We just lost our power charge and we couldn't flicker there. It's the jerky gameplay of Flicker Strike without the feels good of just wiping an entire screen, because it's slow Flicker Strike and it doesn't do particularly well at clear. It doesn't do particularly well at damage. The one thing this character does is it has pretty good defense. You know, 4K regen per second between our life and our ES pool, along with the press cap, good evasion, all that stuff helps a decent amount. Like, it's still like completely a viable build, but 100% a viable build I wouldn't recommend. The only thing that's good about this character is the tri-attribute stack skeleton, which is basically something I know is tried and true. I know it works. I've used it on other characters before. I used it on my bow character this league, and that was one of my best characters, I think. So hopefully that gives you some perspective of, I guess, me trying to do Castle Crypt Flicker Discharge. It was a huge mistake, but hopefully you enjoyed the video regardless. As always, thanks for watching. Take care, Exiles, and peace out.